Good morning. Welcome to the second half of the budget meeting on February 23rd, 2021. I'll call the meeting to order and ask the clerk to do our roll call. Councillor Shortreed.
Present.
Councillor Dayu.
Present.
Councillor Barry.
Present.
Deputy Mayor Danielson.
Here.
Mayor Moffat. Present, thank you. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest today? Seeing none, just a couple of points. As silly as it sounds, somebody yesterday was clicking a pen. So if we could refrain from clicking pens. And on our end, we've also turned off some of the lights because they were buzzing and creating quite an annoyance in the background. So be mindful of your pens, please. The treasurer sent out the parking lot items, and I think you all have that. And I'm going to, just to set the table for today's discussion in case it changes anything, I'm going to ask her to take us through that to carry on the conversation. So, Jeannie, if you would take it away.
Thank you. So I did send out the parking lot items for everyone to have ahead of the meeting, and then I also thought of this, another couple of items that we could consider under the parking lot. One is using the modernization funding for the new card lock system. Initially, I hadn't suggested that because of the projects under roads. We're keeping it in its normal percentages because we were doing a little fewer construction projects this year. So the card lock was sort of part of the normal levy increase for roads. So I hadn't considered that. But given that I'm also recommending the creation of an infrastructure reserve. I think that the new card lock system would be a really good fit for the modernization. We have about $257,000 in that still. And a new card lock system is obviously modernization and efficiencies and so forth. So I think it would be, it was my recommendation that we use that money to fund that project as a new project under this year. The other item that I thought of last night was the HVAC upgrade for door rec. I had initially depleted the door rec reserve for our portion of the HVAC upgrade, but further consideration on that, the HVAC upgrade is directly related to COVID. We probably wouldn't have proceeded with this project if it weren't for the pandemic and the need to upgrade the system in that way. And with our surplus being mainly due to COVID, I feel that we should be able to fund our portion of the HVAC out of the surplus. There's already 39,000 coming, but the additional 51, which would leave that amount in the Dora Rec special reserve for future projects. And I would still put in the 10,000 as annual stipend or an annual contribution to that reserve so that it doesn't fall short going forward and that we don't see that it's depleted. So those were the two type items basically that I wanted council to kind of think about over today, and maybe we can head that way.
And the fuel, you had an idea for the fuel system.
Fuel system. Oh yes, sorry, yes, and the fuel system. The other thing we did have it on the parking lot as costs pending for the fuel system and how to fund that. My thoughts, and again, it's councils can tell me otherwise, but we can't develop an airport with a fuel system that's not up to par. So to me, those funds for the fuel system upgrade should come from the development, and then we proceed from there as we do with the development after that. Is if we don't have an airport, we won't be able to have a development, and the fuel system is the key point. So those funds, when they become, or that project, when the numbers come together, I think council may wish to consider transferring the cost from the airport development fund.
And then the bottom line, if you want to go to page 2 and you want to talk us through the bottom line, it's even more appealing.
So yes, so having said that, with these changes that I'm suggesting, where our levy increase is about 193,000, which is a 3.52% increase in the levy. And that actually results in a municipal tax rate increase of only 2.44%. So bottom line, it's about 1.14%, given no other changes at this point. But we are heading in the right direction as far as I'm concerned, and it's kind of consistent with what the wishes of council has been for years.
So thank you for that, and appreciate you continuing to think about this after hours. So that's up for council discussion. If we use the modernization funds for the card lock system, then that creates some space within which we can create the new reserve and levy that to create the new reserve. So it's still a win. The project still gets done. It doesn't add a point to the levy. And then the using the airport development fund for the fuel system. So wondering what council's thoughts are on those couple of things before we continue on with the rest of the binder. Councillor Barry.
Just to be clear, both of you have used the word airport development fund. Are you talking airport development reserve?
Reserve, yeah, the reserve, sorry.
Yes, sorry.
Darn. Okay.
Yeah, no, there's a new grant opportunity. I see hands, Councillor Dayu and then Deputy Mayor Danielson.
Madam Treasurer, thank you very much. These are rational, logical, reasonable ideas. And the fact that there is an eye on keeping taxation rate as, as lower as is rational, reasonable, and logical within this pandemic period, I think is noteworthy. A lot of our constituents have struggled this last year for reasons that we can't even begin to fathom. And if we can bear that in mind as we go forward with our levy decisions, then good for us and therefore very good for you. Thank you very much for bringing these ideas forward.
And I would note that logical, reasonable, and rational is how we've been budgeting here on Algonquin Highlands for lots of years. So we're getting Jeannie into the fold of thinking that way and using money the best way we can. That's what it's all about, is kind of moving things around for the best benefit all around. And I think Deputy Mayor Danielson had her hand up. Go ahead, Liz.
Yeah, I do like the idea of using modernization funds for the card lock system. I think that's a great idea. I'm just a little bit concerned about. I've lost my Zoom view. About like it kind of makes sense, but I'm still struggling a little bit with using the airport development fund to fund something that is more primarily operational with respect to the airport. It's not completely clean in my mind, but I do see there's an opportunity to to decrease the levy overall. And it seems to me that like I see what Jeannie's saying about without the airport, the development doesn't really go forward, but in some ways it could. I just see that the fuel system as being operational, not capital and associated with the overall development.
I think you could define that either way. I mean, it's definitely capital. It's the installation of a new thing. And
I'm not opposed to it. I just need to get it straight in my head.
Yeah, and it's just food for thought as we continue through the binder. We will circle back to all of this at the end of the day. I don't know that there is much else in the binder that's contentious for us today, but certainly it's parking lot, which we traditionally visit at the end of the day. So I wanted Jeannie to just bring it forward so it can percolate in your head as we go through today, if that's all right.
Yep.
Okay, so then we'll set that aside for the moment because it is parking lot, and we let's get back to where we were yesterday. Mr. Card is already on the screen with us, and we are starting with Parquet, I believe, tab number 47. And I think Parquet's pretty straightforward. Madam CAO.
Yes, just before we get started, I wanted to just point out to council that staff did some research yesterday before we left around the student wages. And Chris confirmed for us that the student wage increase of 1.5, it's not 2%, it's 1.5 was built into his various cost centers. The swim was just an oversight, so that's for council's consideration.
Yeah, and we have to remember that the old "what's good for the goose is good for the gander" is an equitable application of such increases across the board. So while wanting to increase opportunities, however slight they may be for youth, is noble in its intent, there is an impact across all of those similar positions in the township. So it wouldn't have been a lot of money. It's just a principle issue. So it's glad that that's been included and that we caught it. So that's a good thing. So thank you for sharing that. I actually had a note to talk about that and cross up. Okay, parquet. It's pretty simple. I don't know if there's any questions. This is one of those classic situations where don't let the 23% increase get you all excited because it's not a lot of money. So anything we need to know there, Chris, that's outstanding?
There is something that I'd just like to make council aware of. There's a number of trees at the parquet that have died recently or are on their way to dying. So we are going to be removing several of the large trees this year. And at the same time, that's where you see the reasoning for the tree planting. So looking forward, we're going to be starting to plant some trees there and thinking long-term on the health of the existing trees.
Yeah, it's good to keep an eye on that. I know we did a whole bunch of tree work on and off a couple of years ago with concerns at Peekaboo Rock at the tower. There was some challenges with some tree work there. So it's good that those are not outside our purview. Any questions of Chris on the Little Parquet budget? Okay, so we'll move to Stanhope Rink. Again, fairly straightforward. It's not a big budget item. We did the flood cart last year, which is why, if anybody's wondering, the change in supplies and materials. And it's popular, it's being used, so that's good. Anything anybody wants to say about that? Okay, then we will move to Stanhope Firefighters Community Hall. Anything you want to talk about there, Chris? I mean, there's revenue loss. It's not a huge revenue anyway, but there's a revenue loss again because of COVID.
Yeah, so obviously the center, like all of the centers, are closed to any rentals or usage. During COVID, there's a couple of things that we will be carrying forward from the last year that's included in the building and property repairs, which will be a replacement of the commercial fridge there. We're also planning, listed under the interior updates, we're going to redo the wood floor in there. So that's the wood floor refinishing that also has the shuffleboard courts on it. And outside doing the outdoor fill station at the back of the building, which will allow the court users to fill up water bottles. And we'd like to also put a public water fill station at the front of the building, along with repair some of that stonework at the front of the building. And the outdoor fill station at the front of the building would help to alleviate some of the pressure that's on the tap that's at the main township office. That's very popular, and as a result gets some kind of traffic and parking issues. And if that works out, we could transition away from the township office to the Stanhope Community Center. But the first step would be just getting that tap in.
Chris, what's the location, the proposed location of that tap, just in terms of not impeding firefighter parking in front of the fire hall? It'll be toward the public works garage end, I would assume.
Yeah, and the finalization would depend on kind of work that has to go into the plumbing and where the piping is available, et cetera, to bring through the wall. But the intent would be to have it at that end of the building. Yes. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And I'm sure glad that you mentioned the stones on the front because that's been bothersome for some time now. So it just seems weird that there's like 10 little stones that it's just 10 little stones. Can we not get that done? So thank you for that. Questions on the budget here, Lisa Berry?
Yep, just the line painting. I thought the line painting was complete. Is there more work that needs to be done, or is that an error?
So yes, the line painting was complete. So there will be no more line painting this year. So we can just scratch that one right out.
Thank you.
Anything else from council? Okay, we will move along to Dorset Skating Rink. And we've talked yesterday a little bit about the reserve, or not the reserve, the contribution. But actually, sorry, it is a contribution to reserve by Lake of Bays that was confirmed last year, so that will be back in place. Again, pretty straightforward. Any questions from council on the Dorset Rink? Okay, next is Stanhope Library. Any questions of council on library? We know that project is continuing for the lift and the other enhancements there. Okay, Dorset Tower is next. Anything you want to highlight here, Chris? I know there's a couple of larger projects that need to happen here.
Yes, so starting with revenues, right from the top, actually, just something to make council aware of is we will be moving to open a portion of the property this year, depending on any COVID regulations. And this was part of the EOC decision and the media release last week. We will be considering, council will see a report at the next council meeting just around fee considerations, because when we open the tower, we will not be opening the tower structure. We'll only be opening the tower property, and that's because of just various complications for safety of patrons on the tower structure and disinfecting challenges, etc. So we have budgeted right now full revenues. You know, it'd be yet to be seen what kind of attendance we would be getting there, but similar to any of the other programs, budgeting for a normal year, etc., and then we'll be considering the discounted rate because people can't access the tower structure, and then ultimately how all of that is affected with COVID and how many patrons are coming through will be yet to be seen.
Yeah, and one of the things that we'll have to keep an eye on as well, just for interest sake, because we can't control it, is that we see down under other services, that's where the traffic enforcement costs live. And if there are reduced revenues, we will still, it's like, it's kind of like having a parking lot big enough for Christmas Eve shopping, because we don't know what the impact of the pandemic will be on attendance. We still have to plan for, you know, potentially as significant attendance numbers as we've seen in the past. So we might not see as much of a difference last year, or as much surplus there because of those challenges. I see a hand, Councillor Dayou.
Thank you. Mr. Card, what would be the reason to charge a fee at all if people can't access the tower structure? That's question number one. Number two, are you foreseeing a physical impediment that absolutely prohibits people from getting onto that structure? And would that be a new thing? And is that accounted for here if it is?
So in relation to the revenues and charging amounts and discounts, that will be something that council is going to have to discuss in a report that's forthcoming. And there will still be staffing, the same level of staffing required for the property. And unfortunately, again, just with the tower structure being the main draw, people are still going to be able to enjoy the park. They're going to be able to access the water fill station, which is quite popular, the hiking trail, the land-based viewpoints like Peekaboo Rock. And we have to offset those costs with the, or for the cost of the staffing. Okay. Your second question was about the physical barricade. And yes, last year we did put a physical barricade in place with this type of consideration and foresight in mind at the UC group level. So it is in place now, and that's what we'd use for the year.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you.
Any other questions on Dorset Tower? Councillor Shortreed.
I'm just curious, Chris, what's the potential for us getting any more grant money? Because when we did our asset management plan, it was rated very poor and needed $500,000 of work. So we don't have a lot of money in our reserve and not a lot going in. Is there potential to get money again for that work?
There's always potential. So a couple of things, and yes, there are a number of things at the tower property, you know, infrastructure from roads to stairways to work being required on the tower itself to parking areas, all that were identified in the asset management plan. Absolutely, our current reserves do not reflect the needs over the next several years. It's something that we've been building with long-term foresight. That's one of the unfortunate things of this past year with COVID and this next year coming up is that we've structured our fees over the past several years to get the tower from what was historically kind of running at more of a deficit to start getting some revenues and those revenues being able to be put into reserve funds. And there's a long list of items that we did apply for in a previous grant that we were denied, and council will recall that that was all over $4 million. Whether or not there's other grant opportunities that come available, typically there are. That would be yet to be seen. Council would have to decide on each one whether or not we wanted to go for those same things. But at the same time, we need to start addressing some of these things systematically. And that's where you see the lightning strike protection system. When I'm looking at the asset management plan and all of the things listed in it for the tower property, that's really the highest priority at the moment, both from a property standpoint and a safety standpoint. I did talk about at projects and priorities, possibly Peekaboo Rock this year as well. That's something as we developed the budget and developed work plans for the year, we were not able to fit in. So we will have to plan for that for future years. But yeah, consideration to building the reserves, offsetting some of those costs with grant opportunities. There's going to be a lot of considerations as we work in more of the asset management plan.
And so that's where when we get back to the parking lot, and I did just make a note, tower reserve. That's where we get down into the real nitty gritty of deciding, you know, priorities, what's important. We do have an asset management plan that clearly lists a tremendous deficit in funding. So we're behind the 8 ball already. So this is where we'll have to circle back and decide. Jeannie's suggestions are fabulous, and it drops those points enough to be far more appealing than perhaps they might have been yesterday. But we also have to remember that we have to fund an awful lot of projects going forward. So we may look at keeping that levy increase up if it's a conversation to have another point to boost that and make those contributions, because we do have a tremendous amount of work to do based on the asset management plan. So I've just made a note of that for our parking lot discussion. Any other questions about tower? Okay, walking trails is next. Anything there, Chris? We've got the new trail tech.
Yeah, so that's also spread across water trails and ski trails, but you notice it the most as an increase in these kind of smaller cost centers like the walking trails. So I wanted to just remind council of that. It's just over $30,000 total for that new trail tech position. Also directional signs. This is at the Frost Center. This is also in consideration of increased patronage and thinking long term. The more people we get, the more questions we have around trails. And we've just identified quite a few opportunities to relay some of that information and how we display our signage around the property. And other than that, it's just regular maintenance costs on hiking trails.
And I wonder too, if we'll have to keep an eye on, how those costs are likely to increase just with increased usage, more boots on the ground, more people being there and using the space, and degradation may increase year over year with increased use, and especially with the Frost Center having work done and being reopened under the auspices of the new owners. There could be a dramatic enough increase in all kinds of use of things that we manage that we'll have to fund as well. So there could be some big changes ahead there. Any other questions on walking trails? Councillor Shortreed?
I don't have a question on walking trails, but maybe I missed something, but did we skip Stanhope Library?
Nope.
Okay. Sorry.
Did you have a question about, we can go back if you have a question.
No, it's okay. It's just my mind.
Yeah, I mentioned that the accessible project was happening and the other changes, the other upgrades.
Right.
Okay, the next is culture and heritage. I think that's what that says. And I'm sorry, what is this $900 for? I have a circle and then a line and I didn't write down what it was.
So I would have to defer to the CAO or the treasurer. I don't oversee, although this falls under the health and welfare portion of the budget binder. I don't oversee that budget.
It says website maintenance.
But is it for the mapping project via the cultural plan? Sorry, I'm completely gapping on
I
it.
believe, yes, that is what it is.
Yeah, Lisa's saying, yes, that's what it's for. Okay, well, that is what it is. And that project continues, so moderate amount there. Docks and landings. Considering the number of projects that we have to do via docks and landings, there's a lot of work ahead. So it does seem a bit of a slim budget there, but you've got some work ahead for setting the stage for future decision making and capital plans.
And that's really where the work focus will be going this year. Developing the framework, which we discussed recently at council, while at the same time within the special projects line, we'll be paying for the docks that will be going to the hardwood landing to finish up that project there. And then as we finalize that framework, we would be going through the process of the next priority on the asset management plan is the Skin Lake landing. So funding there for engineering, tendering, and possibly, depending on how far we have to go there, some land surveys associated with that. That would all get us set to be able to do construction there next year.
Okay, I see some hands, and I've just jotted down docks and landings in the parking lot because we have so much work to do in docks and landings, and there isn't one of them. There's 27 of them. It's going to be over the short, medium, and long term a tremendous capital investment And I'm concerned that, you know, we get to the end and say, and the longer standing members of council remember what I mean is, how do you feel about that bridge now? Is there may be some room to move some things around based on what are bigger, more substantial and long-term projects such as maintenance and development of docks and landings. So let's just keep that in mind for the parking lot. I see two hands, Councillor Barry and Councillor Dayu.
Yes, within the special projects, you mentioned the Skin Lake engineering tender possible survey. Does that also include any excess construction from the Hardwood Landing, or is that just about completely funded?
That's correct. The Hardwood Landing would just be the 2 new docks. So we're just getting those docks delivered. And actually, it would have been nice to have those docks last year as part of the project, but it ended up being a supply issue with COVID. So we'll have those docks delivered in the spring. So no more construction costs associated with that.
So the bulk of the construction costs is in capital from last year. The actual.
Really, it's just that there's no construction costs at all. It's the bulk of that. So just over $20,000 is the docks, and with the gangway, and then the rest is for the engineering and tendering and land survey process with Skin Lake.
Thank you.
Councillor Dayu and then Deputy Mayor Liz.
Thank you. Chris just answered my question.
Okay, great. Liz, go ahead.
I was just wondering if the, I thought that we had budgeted for the dock extensions in last year's budget. So would that not, the funding for those docks not be coming out of reserves? Any leftover funding would have gone into reserves, right? So shouldn't it be reserves that's paying for those 2 docks and not the levy?
Chris?
Yeah, so the project last year, the construction phase ended up over budget, and then the docks are in addition to that. So given the timelines, we were able to just put it in this year's budget rather than, there wouldn't have been any leftover funds associated with the project last year.
Could only have hoped.
Yeah, I was going to say there's no money left over from that project.
Yeah, so just to point out, we budgeted the 187 and spent just under 200, and then the docks are on top of that.
Okay, thanks, Chris.
Okay, well, we'll visit this again, I think, under parking lot by my notes. So Lisa Berry's going to ask a question now.
Sorry, just one question. I noticed in the reserve sheets that 22,000 has gone into the reserve. Where does that show?
Just let me catch up with you here on the sheet, unless Jean, you've got it off the top of your head.
I do. The 22,000 is the contribution to reserve under the expense side of the docks and landings, and it falls under docks and landings near the bottom of the reserve sheet.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I didn't see that.
Anything else? Okay, I think that concludes Parks, Rec and Trails. Thank you, Mr. Card.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Next is Planning and Development. So we'll bring in the planner. Good morning, Mr. O'Callaghan.
Morning.
Okay, so we have read the budget highlights. There are your projects in your department. They're big and they take a long period of time, other than your day-to-day business, which also keeps you very busy. So I don't know if you want to highlight anything in your highlights or just go straight into the pages.
Yeah, I mean, we're going through the zoning bylaw review, so we're planning on finishing that this year. The short-term rentals as well, that's another big topic that's being tackled, continues to be tackled. So yeah, like you said, lots of ongoing projects that unfortunately take numbers of years under normal circumstances, but add in COVID, unfortunately, it takes a little bit longer as well. So
It does indeed. Okay, well, Liz, do you have just a general question to start with?
Well, yeah, just on the major projects that Sean's got listed, did we not decide that we were not going to go ahead with the development charges study at the county?
I thought the same thing. I think what we said is we would, the conversation was around offering up the development charges study money if the shoreline bylaw consulting project went ahead. We actually haven't finalized that decision. So the money at the county, I believe, is still in development charges. It would be up to us internally if we were going to reevaluate that and reallocate it to the shoreline bylaw RFP process. So we'll take that back there. So in our budget, the development charges study may or may not proceed at our level based on what we decide at the county. But I don't recall that we had suggested that. If you remember, we had the budget discussion and
Yeah,
we talked about that, but I don't think we made the decision on it. So I think that's we'll just have to hold that, put that on pause based on what the county says. Okay, so if we go to the first tab, number 56, it's 66-foot shoreline allowance. Pretty straightforward. Any questions there? Okay, that should be 56, 57, committee of adjustment. Again, it is what it is, and you're right about the potential for increased mileage if people are driving individually. So just maybe a possible little uptake there. Any questions? Number 58, cultural plan. This, I believe, is just for the committee's operation and the signs, right?
yes.
Okay. Next is number 60, road closing.
Sorry, Madam Mayor, just before
Yes.
we go on, may I ask a question about
Absolutely.
that? The supplies and materials at 4,000, it surprised me a little bit. Surely that couldn't be the cost of 3 signs? Are there other things attached to that? Or is it the cost of 3 signs and I'm just out of date on those costs?
I believe the signs did come in under that $4,000 budget, but there are previous year's signs that were also did not proceed. So I think this was sort of a catching up on the previous year's signs plus this year's signs.
Okay, so it could be up to 6 signs possibly this year, because I think it was 3 per year.
Yes, 3 per year was the goal of the committee.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, somebody who volunteered to do the Stanhope based sign last year didn't get that done.
Okay.
That's me.
Oh.
Okay, so then we are at road closing. Any questions? Okay, and there's a couple of these things that have gone by the wayside that are still in the binder that need to be because there's 0 attached to them. So then there's the final one for you is zoning and planning. Anything you want to talk about there? It's a bit of a bigger line item, but it's just your day-to-day business.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, if there's questions, I'm certainly happy to answer those, but I believe it's fairly straightforward.
And it's a decrease. So any questions there for Sean? Well, he's getting away scot-free today.
I even got my whole day for it. It's great.
Back to work.
Yeah.
Okay, then that's pretty easy for you, Sean. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you.
Do you have any further questions? All right, so what I want to do then, does anybody have any sort of, want to go back to anything they thought of last night about yesterday's discussions? We had certainly a big day with a lot of discussion and questions yesterday. Does anybody want to revisit, other than the parking lot, which we'll get to next, anything that you want to revisit from yesterday? Councillor Dayu.
Thanks, and bear with me because I'm trying to do my binder with one hand and have my hand up on the other one. It has to do with the roads budget, and I'm sorry that I can't tell you exactly where in these multiple sheets it is, but there was something about revenue from rental that was quite high, and I wasn't sure what that was.
Yeah, so that's where we rent our own equipment to ourselves.
Okay, got it. Thank you. That was my question.
And that helps build the reserve there. Okay, so if you want to go to the parking lot report that Jeannie provided, what I want to talk about, I think I heard some general support for Jeannie's ideas, but I want to ask council, this is the conversation I want to get into, is it's great to keep tax rates and taxation low, and certainly Councillor Dayu, as you mentioned, there's no question that a lot of people have been hit very hard. We are still obligated to keep the township moving. So I'm looking for a conversation with council about how you feel weighing that against the asset management plan. You know, there's been questions about the reserve for the rec center, which we think we've alleviated, but we have tower reserve is a bit short, and there's a lot of work to be done there. Docks and landings, I'm a little bit nervous about docks and landings. There's a tremendous amount of work to be done there, and I just don't know that we have enough set aside for it. So our reserves are in really good shape. Reserves are meant to be for capital. We have tons of capital work ahead, and even with Jeannie's, with the changes based on Jeannie's suggestions, and it's great. So the levy increase started, we started yesterday at 4.19, and with Jeannie's changes, it's down to 3.52, translates into 2.44 for the tax rate. And when you blend it with the county and the education, it's 1.1. That's impressive. But is that responsible financial management, knowing we have the asset management plan ahead of us with all that work? Got a number of things in the asset management plan that are red, which is replace. And that's what I'd like council to talk about is whether or not this is enough to set the stage for increasing costs going forward. Julie had her hand up first, so I'll go to Councillor Shortreed.
I'm just looking at the very poor and poor on the asset management plan again. The total was 1.4 million, but even after taking off Hardwood Lake, we're at $1 million. But my really big concern is, are there going to be grants with COVID and all the government benefits? Are we going to get cut back huge on any kind of grant to get from the government? And even just with the Skin Lake, that's 95,000 in repairs, and we're just putting 20,000 into the reserve. So I don't know how we're ever going to get anywhere with just this alone, just this one section on the asset management plan.
Yeah, and that's exactly my concern is if we increase, if we stay at a little bit higher levy increase, let's be honest, people don't like it. But then the public also needs to have the programs and the amenities and the services that they need and want to live in our community. So if something has to give, what does council think that is? Is it the landings exist, so it's not like we can say, oh, we're just not going to do anything with that landing, because they exist and they need ongoing maintenance, repair, and redevelopment. So are there things in our budget that we could deem to be unnecessary at this time, so that we can focus more on those core essential services and look for different ways to fund the unnecessary things? And I don't know what they are. I'm just putting it out there for thoughts. Councillor Shortreed.
But then we're just playing a shell game, and this is only the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the asset management plan. So then year after year after year, we're going to be playing that game, trying to stay ahead without increasing taxes. I don't think we're capable of it.
Yeah, and I think you're right. One of the things that happens is it's great to pat ourselves on the back and say, you know, we blended down to 1.14%. As I say, that is impressive, but eventually that will all catch up to us, and somewhere, someday, a group of people will be the council that has to come in with an 8.5% increase because they didn't keep the increases moderately steady over a long period of time to keep those rolling reserves working for us. Councillor Dayoub.
Yeah, you know, I really don't disagree at all. I think what Madam Treasurer has done to bring down those costs a little bit by taking from here and taking from there and bringing down the tax rate can either be celebrated as that, or it can be celebrated as an opportunity to stay at the original tax rate and as you say, build up some of those reserves for things that we're going to need later. Ultimately, the taxpayer gets a bigger bang for their buck because of the recommendations that Jeannie has put forward. My preference would be to, if we're going to stay at the original tax rate suggested, that we put the additional levy into, as Councillor Short, we just said, into docks and landings. I think that's a central part of the Algonquin Highlands identity. And as has just been described, we've got a huge bit of work ahead and almost no reserves left. So for those two reasons, I would very much feel strongly about keeping that original levy where it was and then shuffling some money aside for docks and landings.
So on the tail of that, I have a question for Madam Treasurer. Your suggestion was to create an infrastructure reserve, and you were recommending 1% of the previous year levy, and that's meant to build up some reserves against the requirements of the asset management plan. So if we did keep the increase at the original, would we take that extra and, to Councillor Dayoub's point, create a docks and or add it to docks and landings or put it in infrastructure, because docks and landings is docks and landings, but it's also in the asset management plan. So as we mentioned yesterday, it's great that we have extensive reserves and that we've over the years made them really detailed so we know where everything lives, so it all has a home. It's easy to refer to these when we're having our conversations. At what point do you get too many reserve? You're starting to micromanage your reserves, and it itself becomes a make work project. So if we were going to do with keep the levy where it was and take that extra, Madam Treasurer, would you put it in docks and landings or would you put it in infrastructure reserve? Because docks and landings is both.
It is. Actually, what I was just working on while you were speaking was actually putting 25,000 into Dorset Tower and docks and landings, in addition to where we are at. That leads us to a 4.44% levy increase. So the bottom line isn't that much change. You still have your infrastructure reserve at the 54. That is the catch-all. It's still in there. But you are aligning monies for your docks and landings and tower. I would be hesitant to take it away from that infrastructure reserve because it's, as I say, it's a catch-all. So if something falls short, you're going to have that over time, not this year, but in time. We keep doing the 1%, it will be there to help in a situation where it's needed, but it can go across the board. So if you keep allocating it to one specific project and then another one falls short, we have to find where that comes from. So,
sorry, go ahead.
So all I'm suggesting is the difference between 4.19 where we started and 4.44 is not a great big difference. It's like 0.5% or 0.25%. And that puts money into the Dorset Tower and the docks and landings as council's kind of directed they'd like to. It keeps the infrastructure reserve in place at a 1%, which becomes an expense every year, which will be a normal. And as I said, the bottom line is it's a 3.34% increase in our tax rate for our portion and 1.56 for the overall. So it's a very reasonable increase given COVID situation, but it does address those concerns that we have where we're going to find shortfalls in Dorset Tower and docks and landings.
Yes, and we also had a conversation yesterday about the the septic reserves, which we weren't sure was for the big party, 82,000, and your recommendation from the conversations yesterday is to leave that until the program's complete, just in case. And so we can look forward to, at the end of that, then making a decision with the remainder of that reserve and reallocating it to one of these infrastructure-based reserves, whether it's tower or docks and landings or just the new infrastructure reserve. So there's a little bit of there's an opportunity there next year or the year after to collapse that septic reserve and reallocate it somewhere else. And we did that too with Club 35 in some of our documentation. Somewhere I said to the treasurer, Club 35, but we had reallocated that reserve, but we still call it that because that's what we call it. So again, thinking ahead to move some of those monies around to help fill up those reserves for those capital costs going forward.
Exactly.
So what does council think of that idea of we've made room, and making that room allows us to start a new reserve and again build those up for what we know is ahead. Deputy Liz.
I like the idea. I think that we definitely need to do something with our reserves. That was one of the comments that I made when we started. So in fact, I'd still like to see, I don't know, I would kind of like to see a certain amount of that money targeted specifically for docks and landings. I know that that's not what Jeannie's recommending. You're talking about an overall infrastructure reserve, but we already do have a docks and landings reserve. And I'm just concerned because it is as big an issue as it is. We've got so much work to do in that regard that I would like to see some of it earmarked specifically for docks and landings.
Yeah, I mean, the docks and landings reserve should be sitting at $100,000 or more at least. Yeah,
exactly. I did one thing that we did talk about yesterday that didn't end up on Jeannie's sheet is. We talked about the possibility of taking the swing set out of Oxon Lake. I thought that there was some discussion that there's quite a few projects going on at Oxon with the rear of the building, with the land development, the privy, the lights for the pavilion, it was kind of one of the things that was up in the air. So that's just something that we need to talk about and land on.
And so certainly the playground equipment at $25,000 is coming from reserve. So would you be talking about a reallocation, or because what we had talked about yesterday was leaving that budget as it sits, trying to find some funding through for a play-based funding opportunity such as the ones that exist. Hydro, Home Depot has one or used to. But I guess, and that's a good point. I guess what I'm looking for is we're at that. What are your druthers? What's the priority to keep building reserves for existing infrastructure that we know need a ton of work, or introducing new? And it's always the tough decision, because if you decide not to move ahead with something, it can sting. It can feel like something's being denied or taken away. But these are tough decisions. So it's about existing infrastructure versus new. So thank you for raising that, and I would open it up to how you want to approach that. Councillor Berry and then Councillor Dayu.
That's not what I was going to discuss. So
okay, let's stay on Liz's topic then, and I'll go to Jen. What say ye on that?
Yeah, I absolutely hear and understand and largely agree with what Liz says. I also understand and feel very personally what you've just said, Mayor Moffat, about people not appreciating something being taken away that was already offered. As you know, this is my home ward. I rather liked the idea that we had discussed yesterday, where we put a pause on the project, we look for funding, but we keep that 25 set aside in case it doesn't come through. From my way of thinking of it, we can always revisit the conversation later, can we not? If in 8 months it's decided that no, the hydro didn't come through with the grant money, but we really do need that 25,000 elsewhere. Can we revisit it at that time? I'd hate to cut off our feet before we know whether we've got a chance to run, if you see what I mean. I'm hesitant to do it right away.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we need to be cognizant of, as much as it also stings, is our community centers have been closed for a year. That's not to say that they're going to be closed forever. None of them enjoy tremendous use, but they are an asset, and they're there, and we value them, and we've always kept them. We did make a decision to sell Club 35 because it was not being used at all, except for a card group now and again. And there's always really difficult decisions around what is perceived as core services and soft services. I don't think investing in recreation and culture is a soft service. I think it is a core service for the benefit of the community. But if something has to give, traditionally it's been what is perceived as those softer services. So how do you fund the roads and the landfills and the fire trucks and the docks and landings, the things that exist now to keep the community moving and safe and progressing, and still find room for the other things? And so if something, again, I'm back to, if something has to give, what would it be? The other caveat is, or caution is, if you start having conversations about, well, what is there, what's to give, what has to give in these tough decisions, then you start cannibalizing your very community. So if you determine that all of these things have equal value in the community, and that's a decision for council to make, then the only other option is to raise the levy. And so this is where the rubber hits the road in these budget conversations is, okay, we've gone through this fabulous binder, good job, we're still doing an awful lot of projects, and we're still not comfortable with where we are in terms of keeping ahead of projects that are going to come in the years ahead. Liz, what were you going to say?
Yeah, I hear what Jen's saying about leaving the money in the like it's in reserve, so leaving it there for the swing sets. I'm just looking at this massive list of projects. I mean, just no matter how we land with a so a formula for how we're going to proceed with docks and landings, we know that we've got a massive debt or massive amount of money ahead of us to spend on docks and landings. And they're in, some of them are in very poor repair. I just, when it comes down to, I hate to say it, because I think of families and kids and wanting swing sets, and then I think, oh my God, we've got these docks that we've got to replace, and to me the docks are coming out ahead right now.
Yeah, I mean, we've got a cultural asset, the log chute, which is broken, and we don't know what to do about that. We've the very unfortunate situation of the discovery of mold a couple of years ago in the community hall just over here next door. The basement of that building remains open stud construction because it was torn apart to eradicate the mold, and so we have a building that has a basement that is incomplete and unusable. I guess the only thankful comment about that is that we didn't deny a whole bunch of potential users from using it because nobody's used it in years. So we also don't want to make sure that we dismantle things to fix them and then never do anything with them. Or else you end up with half buildings and half assets all over the place. Liz?
I just, again, looking at what we've got in docks and landings in our reserves, $22,000 is a drop in the bucket. When we know that, for instance, even the project next year is going to cost $100,000, or that's what's being estimated right now. Never mind what comes after that, for planning and design and things like that. It's just one of those things that I think we really need to focus on.
Lisa Berry.
I think Jean is first.
Sorry?
I think Jeannie had her hand up long before I did.
I didn't see her hand because again, she blends in with the wall behind her, right? I can't see her. Jeannie, what do you have to say about all of this?
Well, my only thought is you're still looking at moving a shell game. Like right now that the Ox Tongue, the 25,000 contribution from reserve is offset by the capital cost in that center. So it's no cost to the levy at this point. The only thing you'd be doing is taking that 25,000 from one reserve and applying it to another reserve, which is no different than what we're talking about with the septic reserve. I think it would be more beneficial or to look at the reserve as a whole at the end of the day versus, well, let's just reallocate one reserve to another. Especially when it comes to, like, if we take from the Ox Tongue Community Center and put it into Door Rec, then there'll be something later on in Ox Tongue or something. Like, I just struggle with moving it between the reserves at this point. I would say that at the end of the day, if we decide that a reserve is not required, like the septic, then absolutely redirect it and have those funds go to another reserve. I just would struggle with taking it from one this time. And
yeah, we talked about that yesterday about, all you're doing is filling a line to feel good. So it's a feel good move, but it doesn't alter the bottom line.
Mm-hmm.
That is true. I guess what I'm looking for is, as I said earlier, with the changes going from 4.19 to 3.52, but even if you went to 4.44, it provides a little bit of money for tower, docks and landings and infrastructure, the creation of the infrastructure, but still it's not enough in any of them across the board. So I'm looking at, do we need to go higher in order to set the stage for these tremendous capital projects that are ahead of us? Liz Danielson.
Yeah, and I'm not limiting my suggestion that we need more money in docks and landings reserve to simply shifting it from one place to another. Like, I'd be open to an increase in the levy to start to deal with that. That's kind of going back to the philosophy that Carol spoke to earlier, that you're better to have, rather than try and keeping the increase really low, to have, incremental increases that are, going to deal with sustainability to the greatest extent that we can, and so that down the road, we don't have any nasty surprises in huge increases. I just think we need to we need to, one way or the other, address that particular reserve and maybe, as Julie said, the tower reserve as well.
Lisa Berry.
I think from Jean's initial discussion right off the bat to what she kind of just said a few minutes ago, my interpretation of that was that she's recommending that we start a new reserve with $54,845 and additionally put in $25,000 in a reserve, new money, and an additional $25,000 new money in docks and landing. So to me, I think that we're doing all of that. The only other observation I have is I keep thinking of the swing set, and we're virtually taking 50% of the reserve that Ox Tongue has been working at for years into a play set that's only going to be used by a small amount of the population. Like, I think that project personally needs to have some sort of funding attached to it, because if something happens, another capital project that happens up in Ox Tongue, say they need a new HVAC system or something of that, size, we're back in the same game. We've virtually depleted a reserve that can't proceed. And I do think that, if you're thinking children and playgrounds, like, we're virtually creating a green space backyard that kids could still, picnic and kick balls and enjoy the pavilion all in 1 year. I think we have a lot of projects that we're trying to make time for that virtually are happening 2 years in 1 year. And I just have some concerns. Sorry, that was a really long thought.
That's okay. That's what we're here for. You talk as long as you want. Councillor Dayu.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with any of this. I think the shining hope is in the great idea that Mayor Moffat had yesterday of seeking grant money for this particular project. And then we tick a whole whack of different boxes. So I get back to the idea of, could we pin our hopes on the grant, keep the reserve in Oxtongue Lake, and in a number of months when we know what the grant application outcome is, we can revisit whether it stays for that project, whether we give up that project, whether it stays in that reserve, whether it shifts reserves. But as Madam Treasurer said, it doesn't change the levy at this stage. So in a way, does it matter whether does it matter? Can we just keep it in the Oxtongue Lake Reserve for now, pin our hopes where they should be, and then revisit?
Well, we can, and you're right, because we can end up spending the rest of the day talking about moving the same money from A to B when it doesn't change anything. I think what we need to do, if we weren't having a virtual meeting and we were sitting in this room and all the department heads were sitting at the back, what I always say is, who's got something to give? And that, everybody's come forward with good, solid projects that are important for our community. Are there any that are more important than others? Probably, and we're the ones to decide that. We don't have staff here to say, well, I could get away with not doing this year. Are there any projects that are, I'm gonna make up a word, give upable? Because I ask that every year. And of course, every year everyone looks at the person sitting beside them and says, not me, but maybe you. So I think that's where we are. Our choice is, if council feels strongly enough, which is what I'm hearing, to populate infrastructure reserves for existing assets in keeping with the direction of the asset management plan, the only choice is to increase the levy or eliminate some projects to free up some of that money. Those are only choices. Liz?
I think that this budget has been developed very carefully with a lot of thought put into it. It's tight. We know that at the increase we're looking at, that it's tight. Honestly, I think that my choice would be to increase the levy a small amount to be able to add to the reserves, rather than try and start digging for something to cut at this point. I mean, obviously, I kind of was thinking about cutting the swing set, but I mean, if it's reserve money, I don't see the benefit in shuffling from one reserve to another. So, it would be, I'd probably get shot for saying this, but I would like to see us increase the levy, given the work that we did yesterday, and that Jeannie has offered to us for suggestions. I think we're in a good position to be able to add another, 1%.
Jeannie, go ahead, please.
We won't blame you, Jeannie.
It's okay. I just been listening to everybody's conversations, and so I tweaked the numbers again on this spreadsheet that you unfortunately can't see this time. So right now, I have suggested the increase in the transfer for the Dorset Tower and Docks and Landings to 40,000 for each of them, plus the 54,000 for the asset management. So that's $134,000 we're adding in as new reserve transfers. That brings us to 4.98% in the levy. So just under 5. And our tax rate at 3.89 and the overall at 1.81 based on the county draft. So again, it's doing the purpose that you're wanting. We're seeing that $134,000 is going into reserves to fund future projects, partially just as a catch-all in the infrastructure reserve, but also putting 40,000 in each of the Dorset Tower and the Docks and Landings. I understand that Docks and Landings is quite costly, but I also think that Dorset Tower is a pretty important part of Algonquin Highlands as well. And Chris talked about $4 million worth of projects in that tower as well. So I think it needs to be kind of going to both.
Yeah, I don't disagree. And those numbers are still at the 134 increase to 4.98, 3.89, 1.1, 1.81. Again, those are tremendous numbers, very impressive. So at the, at risking the wrath of the public, there probably is room to increase that a little bit and still have a more than reasonable, again, and setting the stage, setting the table for the future meals that we'll have ahead of us. Councillor Dayoud.
Madam Treasurer, say someone has a $500,000 valued property or a $300,000 valued property. How much would the increase be? Because I get how easy or useful it is to focus on 100,000, but almost no one has that anymore. So say it's a $500,000 value.
Yeah, but if it's, so the reason we do 100 is because then each person can do their own calculation. So if the 100,000 has always been the consistent marker, because MPAC and its assessments all over the map, and they never go down. And sometimes we've seen years when in MPAC's cycle of assessment, people have seen tremendous increases in their assessed value. And I have to wonder with the way the real estate market is right now, how is MPAC going to assess things? I think they will probably have to tune out the noise of the real estate market and just do the their check boxes for their assessment process. I don't have any knowledge whether or not MPAC's changing their methodology. So if we stick with the 100 and your place is worth 5, then you take it was originally 9.98. You would take it 9.98 times 5, and that will be the increase on you. So that's why we always stick with the 1, because if we start going, well, if it's 250, well, mine's 375, well, then you calculate it yourself.
Okay.
At 100,000, if that's been the consistent municipal marker in taxation, which provides just the easiest public consumption for increases.
Okay.
And then the other part I think we need to keep in mind too is if we agree on the direction the community is taking through our decision making, if we set the stage for this is the community that we want to have, then we have to be prepared to fund it. And anything greater than a 0% increase makes people angry. It's always been that way. So we need to make sure that we're confident we're making the decisions we need to make for the community, as opposed to how people will feel about it, because nobody ever likes it. So they don't like it this much, or they don't like it this much. That's just always been part of the process, unfortunately. Their hands all over. I'm going to go to the treasurer first. What's that change for 100?
Just in response to Jennifer's question. So based on the 4.98% in the levy, it's $12.50 on 100,000. So for a 500,000, it's $62.50 for the year on the overall.
Thank you.
There are hands. I'm going to go to Liz and then to Lisa Berry.
Just in response to your saying that they don't like it when there's an increase. They also don't like it when their favorite dock is falling apart, or some facility that they're used to having is not in good stead. I hate to bring up another issue. I just wanted to double check where we landed with the new garage in Stanhope, and if there are any other financial implications to us saying let's get going on that.
Jeannie?
Well, right now, what would happen is the $120,000 that we had allocated to the office addition would be reallocated to the road shed reserve, and that money would offset future financing costs for the shed. But the project itself probably wouldn't necessarily get underway this year until we get a new ops manager in place, I would think. I mean, we have to redo the plans, figure out where it's going, consider the solar and all that. So, I mean, we did bring it out. It was brought to council and a decision was made a couple of years back, my understanding. But there's all the background stuff. So all of that kind of things would go on this year, and then proceed with it going forward.
So we agreed that we could take the 120, here we go, take the 120 from last year put it in, let's call it a garage, because it's definitely not a shed, into the new Public Works garage. The payments, you did, I think yesterday, suggest what the payments might be. So we need, so if you took the 120 from last year's, from Dorset Public Works garage levy increase last year and put it for this Public Works garage, you've got this pile of money that you can itch away at with those payments, but you want to make sure you continue to top that up so that the reserve stays ahead of the payments. But there's going to be a little bit of wiggle room there. And then each year going forward, that 120 is still sitting there.
Mhm.
So as long as enough of that 120 is allocated into that Public Works garage to continue to satisfy the debt for that garage, there is some extra, not extra, but there's some available funds there against that 120 levy from last year that's now permanent in the levy that could be reallocated out to the priorities that we determine.
Yeah.
So there are some options going ahead, as long as we just keep in mind that this is the direction we're going based on the priorities that we set. And we can't say that everything's a priority. We're going to have to say, as Liz said, she feels docks and landing is very important, and I don't disagree. So maybe that's part of our continuing conversation, is pick the top 5 things in this community that absolutely need to be tended to first. I'm going to go to Liz and then to the CAO.
I just was to Jeannie's comment about how we have to redesign the garage. I know we need to talk about the solar and what we're doing there, but I thought it was pretty well settled where the garage was going to go, what the design is, other than the solar issue. I don't know. I don't, because that groundwork has been done, I just wondered why we had to wait until next year to get started. If we're going to borrow money.
Yeah, I don't know that. I don't know, Madam CAO.
That's absolutely true. The only thing that we would need to look at is we would have to recost the whole thing again to make sure that our figures are correct, and then the solar would be taken out of it. We don't know if it'll be a start this year. It could be tendered this year for construction next year. We won't know until we have an operations manager in place. But what I would suggest is, once we get the costing, that it come back to council with Jeannie bringing a financing plan.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and we, where did we land? I know we kind of got, I mentioned yesterday, we kind of got hung up on the cost and the solar. And we briefly touched on the fact that there are some other efficiencies to be found aside from solar, because we're getting stuck on the infrastructure needed to support the solar. And I guess it's the sort of the hill you're going to die on. Is council married to solar because it's a good thing to do, or is the solar enough of a challenge because it's the feed and tariff program is away, so you're only doing, I'm sorry, I can't remember what it's called. Can we find the efficiencies we're looking for philosophically in other measures, or are we going to continue to discuss the solar? Look at the hands all over the place. Councillor Dayu.
Yeah, solar is absolutely not a hill I'm going to die on. The idea is, how can we best fulfill our environmental principles here in Algonquin Highlands? And if solar ain't it, solar ain't it. I think there are other options as well, like the split air system, or I'm not a technical person, and it's a staff job to figure out what they are. But I completely agree. Solar is, it would be a huge undertaking for a technology that is quickly, I don't want to say going out of fashion, but it's the technology is evolving so fast that by the time we get those panels on there, I'm sure the next generation is going to be upon us. So I'm absolutely happy to let solar go, so long as our new ops manager and the designers have an eye on what other sort of HVAC and electrical options there are that could keep our feet a bit away from the fossil fuel pond, which is, I think, the principle that we're aspiring to.
Yeah, and yeah, I mean, so unless does council support at least that part? Because if council agrees that solar is a bit of a muddying thing, we could just set it aside. We can absolutely provide the direction that we insist that there be as many efficiencies found that are non-fossil and are going away from greenhouse gases. Then we wait to see what comes back. So that solves one problem, or one challenge. And there were hands. Who had their hand up? Somebody had their hand up. Liz.
I did, and I'd be good with that. You know, obviously we're going to have to, as Angie said, do some recosting, and I think that at the same time, you know, the engineers can look at what is the best direction for us to go forward as far as energy efficiency, and you know, just see where we land. But you know, I can see us going without solar if there are other considerations that we can put in place. I still don't think that that changes the overall design of the building.
No, it shouldn't. And I think we need to keep in mind too that in the world, you know, a $2 million public works garage, it's actually not a lot of money. And if we don't, someone mentioned this yesterday, if we don't pull the trigger on some of these larger capital expenditures now, it'll just be 2.5, 2.8, 3.1. So you have to jump sometime. Jen, go ahead.
I believe the redesign component of it was the utilities room. Depending on what energy source you choose, the utilities room scope was going to be a little bit different. But happily, we've got a couple generations worth of designs now, and it could be that we just revert to the, you know, to the earlier one. But I think when we talk about redesign, I think that was the only component that really stood out.
Okay, so in terms of the public works garage, we know that we have a safety net, maybe not the best choice of words, in the 120 from the levy last year. So we've got that covered. Regardless of what that project comes in at, the 120 is more than going to cover, satisfy the payments. As long as we keep topping that up with a little bit every year, we can't figure out what that is until we know what the project cost is and the borrowing costs are. But then if we have enough from that alone to keep topping up and making those payments, then we're stretching it out over the long period of time naturally, but that frees up that 120 in years going forward, as long as we remember to reallocate portions of that and others into these priority reserves. And none of that changes the bottom line if we stay where we are, or there's still a conversation of possibly ticking it up to a little bit more. What I would like to do, looking at the clock, it's 20 past 10. It's normally stretch your legs time. So can we just chew on that for a few minutes and just take a break and get a coffee and come back and keep talking? Good. Okay, well, let's take, do you want 10 or 15? What would you like?
15.
Great. We'll see you back here at 25 to 11.
Thank you.
Thanks. So we left off more or less with the treasurer advising us if we took advantage of the opportunity to come in at 4.98, it's 1.81 is the bottom line blended. So looking for thoughts from council on if you feel that doing that and then providing an additional 40 for each of the tower and docks and landings and 54 in the new infrastructure reserve, if that's, well, I can't use the word adequate because actually none of them are actually adequate, but if that's desirable in terms of setting the stage for asset management going forward. We still have an awful lot in, you know, parks and rec and trails and museums and cultural things. So feels to me fairly well rounded. So looking for thoughts from council on where we stand now. And I think Liz, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I would be good with that recommendation. You know, I'd feel a lot better socking a bit more into both of those reserves. So I'm good with that recommendation.
Councillor Dayu.
I'm also very happy with that recommendation. Obviously, we want to be cognizant of the fact that folks have been struggling a lot this year, but I think that some of the savings that the treasurer has found have helped for us to flesh out what we can do with what has been recommended. So that ticks that box for me. I also just want to recognize that this is not a budget of wish lists. There is nothing superfluous in this at all. It is as tight as I think we can make it, and I think we can honor that by looking ahead and making sure that we get the funding we need for going ahead. So yes, I approve of the recommendation.
Yeah, and I think you raise a very good point. You know, it doesn't matter what item you pick in any budget, someone doesn't use it. You know, a number of years ago, I had a conversation with somebody about, you know, we get nothing for our taxes. And I said, well, you know, you get police and fire and ambulance and tennis courts and a recreation center and amenities and so on and so on. And that person said to me, well, I don't use any of those things. My answer was, but other people do. So just because someone doesn't use the recreation center doesn't mean that nobody uses it, because everybody uses the amenities that we provide in a well-rounded community. We are building a year-round community, and it's unfortunate that, you know, the people who bear the burden of taxation often can't enjoy it year-round. But that doesn't preclude us from building, you know, a year-round community that has something for everybody. So we always have to keep that part in mind as well. There were some other hands somewhere on the bottom row in my screen. Councillor Shorty.
I'm happy with that, and I hope that it gives us some leverage in applying for grants that now will have a debt, and maybe in the end it might pay that back tenfold.
Yeah, another good point. I think in speaking to the MPP following the sad news that we didn't get the money for the Dorset Tower, that the massive project, our mistake was it was too much. It was too much and too big, and that the projects that were funded, they were more interested in giving some to many as opposed to more to fewer. And so we know that going forward, that perhaps we had, well, not perhaps, but we had attempted too big a bite. So again, food for thought going forward. Lisa Berry.
Yes, I support the changes. I think the treasurer, like Councillor Dayu said, has found other efficiencies that will help offset some of the new money that we're putting in for reserves. And I do think that not only is our population becoming year round, I think they're becoming there's a lot of permanent people that want to be here year round. Like they're coming to stay, not just to come back and forth. So I think our needs are going to increase. So if we can put some money aside and look long term instead of just at this year's budget, but looking ahead further, I think we're doing that. So I feel confident.
Okay, well, that's Madam CAO. Do you have anything else you want to sort of offer into the conversation? It sounds like we've landed.
No, I would, the only thing I would ask Jeannie, for the benefit of anyone, the public that is watching, we know what the tax rate is and what that blended rate looks like. What is the increase on the levy?
4.98%.
So as far as the next steps, if council's happy with where we're at, we can put together a bylaw. We now have education and county, so we can bring that forward at the next meeting or the next one after that. So,
Councillor Berry.
I don't expect you need to know this answer, and I hope I can phrase it the right way, but when she says 4.98 on the levy, the way I sort of can sleep at night with that is thinking that isn't necessarily the amount of levy that's going to be used this year, because would it be fair to say that 1% of that is going into reserve for future projects? Like, we're not putting that much money necessarily into projects this year, but we're saving money for the larger projects that are coming down the trenches in every direction.
Yes, like of that 4.98, basically a portion of it is funding the reserves for future projects. Absolutely. It's not like a 4.9% increase just to fund your operating for this year. A portion of it is definitely for putting into the reserves to fund future projects. Like 150 or 34,000 of that. So
It's more than that. It's more than 1%.
Yeah, and we historically have been very attentive as a municipality to dividing projects into over a number of years where we have some money set aside and then we'll pay for it over 2 or 3 years. It's like your rainy day savings account. So we'll put money aside till we get to either our half of something that's funded partially through something else, or until we can fund it ourselves. So we don't just run out and buy new shoes because we feel like it. We will actually, we will save for those over a number of years. So we have history of that kind of stewardship. I did see a hand somewhere, Madam Treasurer.
well, just a quick note. So the amount increasing the budget right now, the levy amount is 273,000. So if 134,000 of it is going to reserves, it's 50% basically.
Yeah, so all this discussion is generating $273,000 more than we had last year. It's not a lot of money, and we worked very hard. Staff have worked very hard to squeeze this out, and I think it's again good conversation, good discussion, and strategic in very many ways. Councillor Barry.
Final thought is, I think by doing this, inevitably, our next year's levy and so on doesn't get hit as hard because we're doing the work at the front end.
Yeah, I mean, that's the plan. The challenge always is that, taxes never go down, and something may come up that requires increases. And part of that, it's the balance. Part of that is as you mentioned earlier, Councillor Barry, that more people are living here, and there's more use of assets, more feet on the ground, and that will have an impact on maintenance, number of staff required to sustain and maintain assets and that kind of thing. So certainly the growth in the community is there, and we need to plan for it. Any final thoughts? So have we landed this council? I'm just kind of looking for nodded heads. Oh, Liz has her hand up. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I think we've landed. I was just going to ask if we could get an updated sheet from Jeannie when we're done.
Well, we can, and we need a moment. Do you have that filled in yet? No. Treasurer. So the treasurer needs to, for the resolution, needs to do a few calculations so that we can have the right numbers in the resolution that the clerk has in her hand. So we could maybe, I should have asked this question ahead of the break, because now we're going to have another break. That's sorted out. But Councillor Barry, go ahead, please.
I guess this question might be for Angie. Angie, do you feel confident with this year's budget, given the fact that we're doing new projects as well as finishing projects that weren't completed due to COVID? Speaking with staff, do you feel confident that both sort of we're going to meet there together?
I do. We've had numerous extensive conversations around that. Staff put forward what they feel they can complete. And there was a couple of instances where we said, you know what, let's just take that out of there, because it wasn't going to be possible to do. So I am absolutely very comfortable that, we'll be in a good place this year, providing there aren't more COVID restrictions. So.
Yeah, thank you.
And I think a lot of issues were around supply and demand. That some things that there's a number of projects that were incomplete were based on just simply the inability to get the things that were part of the project. And hopefully, unfortunately, the world is used to operating this way now, and I think some of those supply chains have realigned themselves. So there's a lot of projects that didn't get done that are simply a matter of ordering the things and having them delivered or established, as opposed to what you're asking about, Lisa, which is enough bodies to do the work to get the project done. So I think there's a balance of both of those things. Madam Treasurer, what say ye? What would you like? You need some time to craft that your numbers, and you have the updated sheets. We could, we do have a little bit of time on our side. We can either have these working sheets updated, which I think are done, and emailed to you, or we could even try screen sharing. Unless Jeannie needs some time to work on it, then we would just take a break.
I just want to make sure the numbers are all right before we finish that, do the actual motion. So if you can just, I mean, I can just turn my camera off and you guys can discuss away if you want for 5 minutes, if you have something to discuss or talk about, or take a break, whichever you prefer.
Well, I mean, we can only discuss what's on the agenda, and if we have any more conversation, we'll change the numbers again. So perhaps we shouldn't do that. Okay, well then, my apologies to anybody who has settled back in with a cup of coffee in front of our conversation, but we will take another break while Jeannie crafts those numbers. And how much time? It's 10:02. Would you say noon?
Noon?
No, like.
Sorry, I mean 11. I'm looking, I can't tell time now, apparently. So 11 o'clock. So we will again take another short break while the treasurer crafts those final numbers for us. Liz, do you wish the treasurer to email each of you? Do you want to see these sheets in your inbox again?
Yeah.
So normally you'd be here, so we would just print them and hand them out. So we'll maybe, Jeannie, then do you need a little bit more than 10 minutes to update that, email it to members of council, and organize the numbers for the resolution?
Go with 11:15.
Emailed after the meeting. I just would like to have it when we're done.
Okay, does anybody else want to have it now, or are you okay to have it as reference after the fact? After the fact, I'm seeing. Okay, so we're going to take 10 minutes. We'll be back here at 11 o'clock, not noon, and then we'll go through the resolution. So any final thoughts? Final, we've landed. Just want to double, triple, quadruple check. Okay, great. So we will take a break. We'll be back here at 11 o'clock with the resolution. Okay, we are back, reconvened. Thank you for your patience. Just before we wrap up, I just want to reiterate thanks to staff, to Angie for leading the team, and to Jeannie for bringing her insight to our process. We really do have great staff who are very thoughtful about their role as part of the team. So we couldn't do it without them. So thanks to them for their efforts each year. We always say every year we say this has been a tough budget. It seems like every year is a tough budget and they're getting tougher, but good job for all of us, I think. And thank you to council for all of your input and your questions and thoughtful consideration of what's important for our community to continue to thrive. What we need is a mover and a seconder for the tax rate bylaw motion. So I can have a mover and a seconder for that. Deputy Mayor Danielson and Councillor Shortreed.
Moved by Deputy Mayor Danielson, seconded by Councillor Shortreed. Be it resolved that council hereby directs staff to prepare the tax rate bylaw, including a levy of $5,757,767 to be brought forward for consideration at the March 18th, 2021 regular council meeting, and that staff be authorized to proceed with the proposed projects.
All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. May I have a mover and a seconder for the confirmatory bylaw? Councillor Dayu, Councillor Berry.
Moved by Councillor Dayu, seconded by Councillor Berry. Be it resolved that bylaw 2021-18 being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings that council held during a special meeting on February 23rd, 2021, be received and read a first time, considered read a second and third time, and finally passed with corporate seal affixed.
All in favor? It's carried. Thank you. And finally, a mover and a seconder for the adjournment. Councillor Shortreed, Councillor Dayu.
Moved by Councillor Shortreed, second by Councillor Dayu. Be it resolved that the February 23rd, 2021 special meeting of council is hereby adjourned at 11:03 a.m.
All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Thank you again, everybody. Good job. And I'm proud to be part of this team. So thank you.
As are we.
Thank you.
Thank you.